And welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk, featuring Tim Weiner in conversation with Politico's Natasha Bertrand for a discussion of his book, The Folly and the Glory, America, Russia, and Political Warfare, 1945 to 2020. I'm Kate Whitman, and I'm the Vice President of Author Programs and Community Engagement for the History Center, and I'm glad that you're here this evening. Copies of The Folly and the Glory are available from our official bookselling partner, Acapella Books, and can be purchased from the link in the chat box, which is to the right of your screen. You can also submit questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and Natasha will get to as many of them as time allows. Tim Weiner has won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award for his reporting and writing on national security and intelligence. He covered the CIA, the war in Afghanistan, and crises and conflicts in 14 nations for the New York Times. Weiner has taught history and writing at Princeton and Columbia. The Folly and the Glory is his sixth book. Natasha Bertrand is Politico's national security correspondent. Previously, she was a staff writer for The Atlantic, covering national security and politics. She worked as a politics reporter for Business Insider after graduating from Vassar College in 2014, and she's an NBC News and MSNBC contributor. Thank you both for being here. I'm sorry it's not in person, Tim, but Natasha, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining this extremely timely discussion. I'm really happy to be here with Tim, who's written an excellent book, and I encourage everyone to pick it up because it's such an important subject on political warfare from 1945 to today between the Soviet Union, Russia, and the United States. So I guess I want to start out with a bit of news of the day, which is pretty big, which is the former National Security Advisor in the Trump White House, H.R. McMaster, actually said today that Trump is aiding and abetting Vladimir Putin in the sense that he is furthering disinformation about the election, that he is refusing to disavow white supremacists, that he is sowing chaos ahead of the 2020 election. So I'm wondering, Tim, because so much of your writing has been focused on, and you're speaking in your new podcast, Whirlwind, has been focused on this possibility of the president being an agent of influence for Russia, what you make of McMaster's statement today, which was pretty jarring.
Chilling and clearly true. The president of the United States is an agent of influence for the Russian Federation. And that has a very specific meaning in the American intelligence lexicon. An agent of influence is a person with power and authority who can shape public opinion or make policy for the benefit of Russia. Trump fits that bill. It is no secret that he kowtows to Vladimir Putin. It is no secret that he shapes American foreign policy in the interests of the Kremlin. It is no secret that he does nothing if and when Russia pays bounties to the Taliban to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. And it's no secret that he has and continues to dismantle American national security institutions to benefit the Kremlin's covert operations against the United States. The question is why? We got a clue this week when the New York Times, my old newspaper, published information from Trump's tax returns. The president of the United States owes $421 million to who we do not know. More than 300 million of that he is personally on the hook for. Not the Trump organization, him. And that bill is coming due in 2 or 3 years. Who does he owe the money to? How will he repay it? These are crucial questions. Boils down to this. If Donald Trump were applying for a job anywhere in the American government, he couldn't get a security clearance. This is a danger to our democracy.
This is exactly what former intelligence officials have been saying, that this is the possibility that someone could be coerced based on their financial situation is a very real one. And it's why it's a big question that is asked of people who are applying for security clearances. This is not merely a trivial thing about being in debt. And to be clear, let's dive in a little bit deeper to the agents of influence thing for a second. To be an agent of influence doesn't necessarily mean that you are actively being co-opted or coerced by the Russian government, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about how it can be as implicit as it is explicit?
I'll give you an example from American history. In 1937, there was a congressman, New York congressman, named Samuel Dickstein, who was the chairman of the House Immigration and Naturalization Committee. And in 1937, this United States congressman walks into the Soviet embassy in Washington, sits down with the ambassador, and volunteers to be a spy for the Kremlin, sells fake passports, forged passports for the Soviets to use for their spies to give them cover, holds hearings investigating Stalin's enemies in the United States. He was greedy, he got paid. He was so greedy that the KGB codenamed him Crook. Samuel Dickstein's secret stayed locked up in the archives of the KGB for 60 years until 1999. I'm in Brooklyn. If you go over to Manhattan to the Lower East Side, stand on the corner of Pitt and Grand Streets, you're standing in Samuel Dickstein Plaza. He got away with it. He was an agent of influence, and he volunteered. People become Americans, become Russian agents for a variety of reasons. And I go through them in The Folly and the Glory. Some volunteer. Some do it for the money. Some do it for ideology. Some are known in Russian as polezny durak, useful idiots. And they do it because for the thrill of it, for the pleasure. Sometimes they're aiding and abetting a cause that they don't understand. We don't know why Trump serves as an agent of influence, but he does. The evidence is overwhelming. And there was a time, not too long ago, 3.5 years ago, when the FBI mounted a counterintelligence investigation to investigate why. And that investigation was strangled in its crib by Trump's Justice Department. There's a ghost of a chance that it's going on in the deepest secrecy, but I doubt it. So does the guy who ran it, the FBI counterintelligence agents, Pete Strzok. So we don't know the why of it. If we don't investigate this question, Natasha, it's going to haunt this country like an incubus.
Yeah, and it was reported at times that it was Rod Rosenstein who instructed Mueller not to look into anything related to Trump's finances, which really the counterintelligence team at the FBI saw as one of the biggest possibilities of finding out what the actual connection was between Trump and the Russians, if there is one. So let's step back for a moment and talk about your book. I think that when we're discussing whether or not Trump is an agent of influence, there was a really big light bulb moment for you back in 2018. And I was wondering whether you could dive into that a bit.
So most of my life, which is getting pretty long at this point, most of my life, I've been reporting on American intelligence. And I've written a history of the CIA, history of the FBI. And in July 2018, I was working on a history of the Pentagon. That was going to be the third book in the trilogy. Well, it wasn't going as quickly as it could have. It was really pushing the stone up the hill. And my wife and I were on a working vacation in Vermont. And we're trying to stay off the news, stay off the internet, just right. So on the morning of July 18th, 2018, I got in the car, drove up to the general store, picked up the New York Times, and there is the story of Trump and Putin in Helsinki. And I think everybody in this audience probably remembers that. They're standing side by side. A reporter asks a question to both of them. So Russia hacked America's election in 2016. Do you think, Trump, that Russia did it? And Trump says, well, I have my chief of American intelligence, my director of national intelligence, Dan Coates. He tells me Russia did it. I have Vladimir Putin standing right here. Putin says he didn't do it. I don't see any reason why Russia would have done it. So he's saying he believes Putin over his own intelligence community. Said they didn't do it. Of course, the overwhelming evidence is that they did. And they were continuing to. A lot of people remember that. People don't remember quite as well what Putin said. He said, I'm translating, as to who can be believed and who cannot be believed. No one can be believed. There are no facts. There is no truth. This is the thrust of Russian disinformation operations, to get you to believe that there are no facts and there is no truth. Everyone's corrupt. Democracy sucks. Give up. And Trump aids and abets that instrument of political warfare. That is the pointed end of Russian disinformation operations that have been attacking the United States since the late 1950s. Trump is the spear carrier.
So define political warfare. Obviously, it's the central tenet of your book. What is it? Why is it so effective? And why is the United States so bad at it?
Right. Well, we didn't used to be bad at it, Natasha. We were pretty good at it. Political warfare is the way that America and Russia fight war. Ever since the end of World War II, ever since the dawn of the nuclear age, we can't actually go to war with one another. Our countries would be smoking, radiating ruins in a matter of 2 hours. Political warfare is how you fight war without using nuclear weapons, tanks, troops, smart bombs, stealth bombers. It's the entire spectrum of everything from diplomacy through covert operations, sabotage, espionage, intelligence operations aimed at the other side. In the Cold War, which we won, by the way, we won political warfare in the 20th century. The CIA was very good at operations that could prevent a country from going communist at the ballot box, for example. Their very first covert operation, weeks after they were created, was to make sure that the conservative Christian Democrats won the Italian elections, the first post-war elections in 1948. The Communist Party was very strong. The CIA went in with a secret weapon, cash, and they bought political power in Italy, and they kept on covertly supporting the Christian Democrats in Italy for 25 years, more than $500 million in direct covert payments from CIA to the ruling party. The CIA created the ruling party with Japan in the 1950s, the Liberal Democratic Party, which is neither liberal nor democratic nor a party, but it is the ruling party of Japan and has been since 1955 with a few short interregnums. We had kings and princes and potentates and prime ministers and presidents on our payroll. And that was really the effective secret weapon. When, and there's a chapter in the book on this, when the Solidarity movement in Poland, the trade union movement that had risen up against Big Brother in the early 1980s, was on life support, and Poland under martial law, the CIA slipped not only cash, but the instruments of a free press to the Polish underground, kept them alive. And that led to the triumph of solidarity, the People's Unions movement in Poland, which toppled the government. And that was the domino that knocked over the Soviet Empire. That was the greatest covert operation in the history of the CIA. The Russians and the Soviets before them were experts at disinformation. It's a Russian word, disinformatia. And that's not just propaganda or lies. It is lies carefully crafted to appear to come from someone else, from some other purpose, from some other direction. Did you ever hear that the CIA killed President Kennedy, or the FBI killed Martin Luther King, or that the United States Army invented the germ warfare laboratory of the US Army invented the AIDS virus? Millions of people have heard that. Those are KGB disinformation operations. And the goal from the 1950s onward to today was to damage Americans' trust in government, and particularly in the institutions of national security, like the CIA and the FBI, to besmirch the image of the United States overseas, particularly in the third world, and to find the divisions, the wounds in American society and rub salt in them. For example, on race relations. And they were very good at it. The Russians have been at this kind of thing, espionage, sabotage, subversion, as instruments of statecraft since the days of Peter the Great. We've only been at it since 1947.
And there were efforts to neutralize those disinformation efforts.
Right.
There were efforts to push back by the State Department and by the Active Measures Working Group. You talk a lot about that in your book, and how their goal was threefold. It was to report, to analyze, and publicize. And we don't really do that anymore. Why? I mean, why do you think that is? And do you think that if efforts to push back on the lies were more forceful, it would have a dramatic impact?
The Active Measures Working Group, which is a completely obscure group that almost nobody's ever heard of, that started in the early 1980s and was disbanded at the end of the 1980s, was a handful of people from CIA, from state, from the agency, the United States Information Agency, who, working with State Department diplomats abroad, identified KGB disinformation that was damaging, in some cases ruining the reputation of the United States. The AIDS hoax was devastating to the image of the United States. In the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, the KGB produced what looked like KKK leaflets with language I cannot repeat here, aimed at every Black, Asian, and Latino athlete at the Olympics, saying, "Welcome to LA, we're going to hang you." Devastating to the reputation of the United States if left unchecked. And we all know now, if we didn't know before, that a lie can go around the world before the truth can put on its pants. So this group identified KGB disinformation. Sometimes it was easy. For example, in the KKK leaflets, they hyphenated coup and klux. Or they would misspell a word using British English, like maneuver with an OE in it, because KGB officers learned British English before they learned American idiomatic English. And they called them out. The Active Measures Working Group fell apart in great part because the FBI agent detailed to it was pulled off because one of the KGB guys who were working for the United States and who had identified the KKK disinformation as KGB, was his guy. He was controlling this guy, Sergei Motorin, in the Soviet embassy in Washington. Motorin disappeared. He disappeared because there was a CIA turncoat working for the KGB named Alder James. Milburn pursued Ames for the next 6 years. His replacement on the Active Measures Working Group was an FBI agent named Robert Hansen. And Hansen had been working with the KGB since 1979. And he went on until 2001. The Soviet and Russian penetration of the United States through espionage was deep throughout the Cold War and thereafter. And that is in part because the United States is an open society, easier to penetrate through espionage and subversion than a closed authoritarian society. But it's also because the Russians are really good at espionage and they play a long game, as you know, Natasha.
Absolutely. And they've been pretty successful, as you write in your book, at laundering disinformation through journalists and through the media. And the CIA started to play that game through Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a bit and the success of that operation. It seemed like it really had a big impact, especially in Poland, on the rise of the Solidarity movement.
Well, Radio Free Europe, which is now being systematically destroyed by the Trump administration for reasons that I can only speculate about, was created by the CIA in 1950, and the CIA ran Radio Free Europe until 1972, after its secret funding of this enormous organization was exposed. Radio Free Europe broadcast a mixture of news and propaganda behind the Iron Curtain. And it was a lifeline. It became more effective after its CIA funding ceased. It was not a US intelligence front anymore. It was an open organization. And it was so important, as was the Voice of America, also being systematically destroyed by the Trump administration as we speak, as a beacon of hope to the Polish people, not just news, but jazz. The VOA broadcast jazz to Poland, and jazz was the sound of freedom. The Poles loved it. Music as propaganda was very, very effective. But after Solidarity triumphed and the Soviet Union came apart and Poland was free, Lech Walesa, the head of Solidarity, who became the leader of Poland, was asked about Radio Free Europe and whether, it had helped the Poles. And he said, would the earth exist without the sun? Information, free information, truthful information. Because by then it was not a propaganda organization. Is vital to democracy and freedom.
So the reason why I bring that up is because it seems like the press in the United States has actually learned quite a lot since 2016. There's a lot more awareness, we hope. But at least anecdotally, I know that there's a lot more awareness among the general press of being used as tools of the Russians, of being used as tools of Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, especially with the experience of the WikiLeaks hack and leak, and how pretty much every journalist in America rushed to cover the substance of the leak rather than look at the origins of it and the motivations behind it. Tragic. So now kind of a savvier, I would say a little bit at least, a savvier media environment in the US, it seems like the Russians have now begun to try to launder their information elsewhere. And I mean, the United States Congress. There have been investigations that are ongoing in Congress into Joe Biden's family, for example, and corruption between Joe Biden and Ukraine, and what isn't that well known about these investigations is that they are actually being fed largely by a person that the United States has already identified recently as a Russian agent, and actually was sanctioned by the Treasury Department earlier this month, by the Trump administration Treasury Department, for being a Russian agent.
Quietly sanctioned.
Without much fanfare. And for trying to interfere in the elections. And this is someone whose claims are being directly echoed, if not directly feeding claims by members of Congress, Trump's allies specifically. So I wonder, given this shift, how do we fight that? How do we fight that kind of interference, given that it's now they've shifted tactics, it seems, less about trying to hack and dump, although the election's not over yet, and more about trying to launder it into the public narrative through legitimate actors like members of Congress.
The President of the United States, the man he appointed to be the Director of National Intelligence, a partisan hack who knows as much about intelligence as I know about theoretical astrophysics, and select members of Congress are laundering Russian disinformation for the Russians and for the American people on behalf of the Russians and feeding it into the American political system. Just this week, the aforementioned Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, took a piece of information saying essentially Hillary Clinton engineered the 2016 election hack against herself and fed it unilaterally to Lindsey Graham, who then put it on the record. Ron Johnson, Republican senator from Wisconsin, has been trying to, and succeeded in, laundering Russian disinformation about Joe Biden into the public record. Are they going to get away with it? Not this time, because the press is onto this game. And we weren't 4 years ago, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah, it really strikes me by how unprepared the intelligence community was for the onslaught in 2016. And you talk about this as well in your book about—
I'm trying to restrain myself.
Yeah, the Obama administration's kind of unwillingness to confront this.
The entire political establishment, not just the American intelligence community, the entire American political establishment watched what Russia was doing in 2016, like a cow watching a train go by, seeing but not comprehending what was happening. Oh, her emails. Where did the emails come from? They came from a Russian intelligence operation that penetrated the DNC, just as Nixon's plumbers penetrated the DNC in 1972. They did it with burglars' tools and wiretapping equipment. The Russians did it by spear phishing. The Trump campaign laundered this information and put it out in the public realm. And our brothers and sisters in the press, by and large, not entirely, ate it up. And on our heads be it.
And why do you think, you also talk about in your book how there was just a blind spot. After 9/11, everything was really funneled toward terrorism efforts. So this focus on counterintelligence really went by the wayside. Why is that so dangerous?
If you don't have counterintelligence, you are naked before your enemies. Counterintelligence is the shield. Espionage is the spear. After 9/11, the whole of the American government, and in particular its intelligence services, CIA, FBI, National Security Agency, everybody, was single-mindedly devoted to counterterrorism, understandably. But as the war on terror went on, through the black sites, through the secret prisons, through the fabricated intelligence about weapons of mass destruction, the real secret weapon that America had and has always had to project its power by projecting democracy. By saying the American democratic system is a shining city on a hill. We lost our ability to project that because our image in the eyes of the world was besmirched by the conduct of the war on terror. At the same time, and I date this to 15 years ago, the relentless and single-minded focus on counterterrorism made us take our eyes, collectively, our intelligence eyes, off the ball of espionage and counterintelligence. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin was gearing up to seek revenge for what he called the greatest political disaster of the 20th century, the collapse of the Soviet Union, aided and abetted by the United States. First, Putin attacked the nation of Estonia, took them down with a cyber attack. Then, with a combination cyber attack and deception operation, he took down Ukraine and severed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. At the end of 2014, Putin and his spies hacked into the Central Election Commission of Ukraine. They were holding a national election, altered the results. And for about an hour, the world thought that a fringe pro-Putin candidate had been elected president of Ukraine. They can do that to us.
Scary thought. I'm going to take it to the questions now. And these are good questions. So one anonymous viewer asks, why do you think the Republican Congress has been complicit in this? And I'll add to that, certain members who used to be very hawkish in this area, Lindsey Graham, for example. Lindsey Graham is now one of the ones peddling Russian disinformation openly. So why do you think this has changed?
American politics is not my greatest field of expertise. And the inner mysteries of Senator Lindsey Graham remain a mystery to me. The Republican Party has become a cult, the cult of Trump. I mean, a political party is kind of a cult with power. There is a really mysterious devotion to a man. I mean, look at Lindsey Graham, for example. Lindsey called Trump a kook and a xenophobe and a bigot and a madman, or words to that effect, in 2016. And now he's all in for Donald Trump and his disinformation operations. It's a cult, and we'll see what kind of political power the cult has in 32 days.
Yeah. Another viewer asked, please speculate about the dismantling of Radio Free Europe. You mentioned that you could only speculate why it was being undercut.
Donald Trump has, for 4 years now, tried to tear down the pillars of American national security. The CIA are stormtroopers. The FBI are Nazis. American diplomats are human scum, to quote him. Radio Free Europe and the Voice of America are like jewels in the crown of American political warfare, and have been for decades. It's not a bull in a china shop, it's a vandal in a temple.
Fascinating. And how would you compare the impact of Russian disinformation in the US with homegrown American lies and BS? And this is a question I think that the New Yorker asked recently in a big article examining your book as well, is how do you measure the impact of disinformation versus things that the president says every day, foreign disinformation versus homegrown lies?
That's a two-part answer. we are doing it to ourselves. Remember when I said Putin and Trump in Helsinki, when Putin said, there are no facts, there is no truth. Give up. That's the message of Russian political warfare. Give up. No one can be believed, to quote Putin. It's all a lie. Go home, watch your video games, tune out. And we have done it to ourselves. I would point to Fox News. There used to be a joke in the Soviet days, a kind of joke called the Russian reversal. Like, in America, you'll listen to radio. In Soviet Russia, radio listens to you. Well, in an autocracy, you have state-run media. In a great part of America, you have a media-run state. And that is a danger to democracy.
Yeah, it's very powerful indeed. So given your understanding of where Russia's proxies have been driven out of power, how do you envision the current US president retiring in whatever country of his choice? I think you
Now,
and I
Natasha, that would call for baseless speculation on my part. All right, let us imagine, do a thought experiment here. Let us imagine that at noon on the 20th of January next, the invisibility cloak of presidential power is removed from Donald Trump, and he stands naked before the world. A couple of miles from where I'm sitting, the Manhattan DA is preparing to examine Trump's taxes and the financial records of the Trump Organization. Trump can delay that maybe another couple of weeks, maybe another couple of months, but the law is coming for Donald Trump. And we will know the answer to the question I raised here. Why has he kowtowed to Putin? Why has he attempted to destroy American national security institutions? Why did he? I mean, this was his parroting of a Russian disinformation operation that Ukraine had the server that would expose the lie of the Russia hoax. His parroting a Russian disinformation line got him impeached. That was straight up Russian propaganda that he pursued and tried to extort Ukraine to give him this non-existent server. Straight up extortion based on his belief in a Russian disinformation lie. We will know the answer to this mystery when the law comes for Donald Trump, and it will.
And even his own former director of national intelligence, Dan Coates, said that he could only, he really didn't know what Putin had on Trump, that he was mystified by the relationship. And he is someone who is at the center really of that relationship for
Natasha, you're one of the best national security reporters in Washington. And what makes you good and what we all need to emulate is that we are so hammered by the constant flood of news and information, mostly bad this year, that we can't see over the edge of our desks. We can't look out over the horizon and take in what is right before our eyes. There is no question that Donald Trump is aiding and abetting a Russian intelligence operation designed to damage or destroy our democracy. This is an irrefutable fact that is recognized by his own veterans of the National Security Council and his own Directorate of National Intelligence. It is not a secret, but it is a mystery as to why. In intelligence, there are secrets and mysteries. You can find out secrets. You're very good at it, Natasha. Mysteries take longer.
That is
I
true.
firmly believe We're almost out of time, I know. But I firmly believe that there are no secrets that time will not reveal.
I think time reveals all, doesn't it?
We live in hope.
We have a couple more questions, and we have a good 5 minutes left, so I think we're solid on time. But someone else asks, if Biden wins and he asks you to counter what Trump has done, what would your advice be? Countering the impact of Russian disinformation and Russian election interference on U.S. democracy, what would first steps look like to repair that?
American intelligence is like an orchestra. It has to have a conductor, and that conductor has to be the President of the United States, who makes the policies. And the intelligence services are essentially instruments of that policy. They don't like dream stuff up to do. I mean, the CIA didn't say in 1960, hey, I got a good idea. Let's go kill Fidel Castro. That's not how it works. So the president is the conductor. The foreign policy of the United States is the sheet music. And then you have 17 instrumentalists on 17 different instruments in the orchestra. If there is harmony among the president, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the directors of national intelligence, you can do things. You can pursue the foreign policy of the United States and the projection of American power without getting people killed unnecessarily or starting a war that you don't want to start. Not only is the orchestra scattered to the four winds, but the Philharmonic Hall, the roof is falling in because this president has attacked that institution. So the first order of business would be getting honest and decent people who know what they're doing in charge of the State Department, the Defense Department, the intelligence services, and deciding how we are going to begin. It's going to take decades to repair the image of the United States in the world.
And on a separate subject, the United States obviously has a lot of its own issues internally, even without the help of Russians, but they are known to exacerbate those issues, obviously. And one of the big ones is white supremacy. So someone else asks, to what extent are Russian operatives or others contributing to the growth of white supremacy? And is the current administration complicit, either implicitly or explicitly, in that, given Trump's refusal to denounce the white supremacists?
The Russian intelligence services have created right-wing websites to draw people of the Proud Boys ilk to those websites and to inflame their tender sensibilities. The Russian intelligence services in 2016, their biggest target was Black voters, to suppress their votes. They're doing it again today through information operations. And they're doing this in harmony with the President of the United States. They don't have to work as hard as they did in 2016 because the president is doing a good deal of their work for them. And doing it, I would assess, to greater effect. This is a terribly dangerous moment for American democracy. For the podcast, Natasha kindly mentioned Whirlwind, which is really good. And based on the book, I did an interview with General Michael Hayden. Michael Hayden's a four-star general. He ran the NSA and the CIA under President George W. Bush. And Hayden told me, if Donald Trump is reelected, it will be the end of American democracy. Full stop. That's where we're at, people.
Michael Hayden is not known as an alarmist.
Michael Hayden is a rock-ribbed conservative four-star general.
Pretty significant. So the final question that we have is kind of talking about Putin's own issues, his own issues domestically, and he has a lot. Russia's economy is not doing great. Putin is pretty unpopular. So this
Doesn't really
person
matter, does it?
doesn't really matter, no. But this person asks that some political commentators say that Putin's actions against the US are in some ways defensive because Putin has his hands full handling problems governing Russia. So what are your thoughts on that?
Putin doesn't have his hands full. Putin is, unless he dies or is overthrown, going to run Russia until 2036. A 36-year reign eclipsing that of Joseph Stalin. Putin's goal here, as was the goal of the KGB from the 1950s onward, is to weaken the United States, which it cannot defeat militarily. And he has run, for the last 5 years, 6 years now, the most successful covert operation since the Trojan horse. And there's nothing right now to stop him.
Well, on that note,
On a happy note.
on that optimistic note, I think those are all the questions. So we're going to wrap it up here. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Great. Really appreciate it.
And thank you, Tim. Yes. And please, everyone, buy a copy of Tim's book. It is fantastic, so timely, such necessary reading. The Folly and the Glory ahead of the 2020 election. You need to be informed about what's going on. And the US government right now is not doing a great job of informing you. So look to journalists and historians like Tim and listen to his podcast, Whirlwind, because as he said, it is very excellent. So thank you so much.
Natasha, you're great. Thank you. And thanks to everybody in Atlanta. I had a great time last time I was there with my History of the CIA, Legacy of Ashes. And God willing, we'll meet again someday.
Have a good night.